Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's event. We will be starting shortly, just giving everybody a few moments to join the live event. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Priya Aggarwal, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Paper. For those of you that might not be familiar with the company, Paper partners with K-12 schools throughout North America to give every student an equal opportunity to excel academically. Our educational support system provides learners with unlimited 24/7 homework help, writing feedback, and study support. Our tutors deliver on-demand one-to-one academic support in 4 languages across more than 200 subjects. So students really just always have access to the extra help exactly when, where, and how they need it. We're really excited to be launching this new discussion series in collaboration with SITE, all around scaling one-to-one experiences for every student. Over the next couple of weeks, we'll be tackling different implications of delivering one-to-one experience, including cost, infrastructure, and equity considerations. Today's panel is going to be unpacking the ongoing costs and complexities of one-to-one initiatives, everything from the spend on initial devices to software services, training. And I'm really excited to bring into this conversation Seth Heeren, Assistant Superintendent of Business Services at Jacinto USD. Hi, Seth.
Morning, everyone.
And Dr. Grant Litfin, from Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services at Tustin USD. Hi, Grant. Before we dive in, just a couple of really quick logistics. All of the attendees are in listen-only mode, but we do highly encourage you to submit your thoughts and your questions via the chat feature. And maybe just start by telling us where you're dialing in from and what your role is, just so we kind of have an idea of who's in the audience. And so let's get started. Seth and Grant, I'd love each of you to introduce yourselves to kick us off. Tell us a little bit about your districts, and maybe even just about what one-to-one student experiences look like today in your community. Grant, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, happy to. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're tuning in from. I'm Grant Litfin. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Admin Services in Tustin Unified. And Tustin is about a 24,000 student district in Southern California. We are kind of the mirror demographics of California. So we have a wide variety of socioeconomic statuses, ethnicities, languages. It's a great place to work. It's a great place to kind of study if you're a college student or a professor or university wanting to see what would work as a microcosm. So it's a fun place to work because they're so versatile. We have had a one-to-one program for about going on 8 years now. It's fairly large. We also have a pretty incredible infrastructure set that we can talk about a little bit more today. But my background, I was an elementary educator, trained in Minnesota, came out here to California, was a middle school teacher, middle school AP at both a high SES and Title I school. Shifted to be a high school AP, curriculum and athletics, and then was a high school principal in Torrance, California at a Title I school, moved to Los Alamitos, which is a very large, very high SES school. And then director of secondary ed here in Tustin and assistant superintendent following that role. And I've been here in Tustin for about 8 years. So I'll pass it off to Seth.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, as Grant mentioned. Seth Heeren, I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Business Services from San Jacinto, USD. We're about 10,000 students in Riverside County. I tell people that we're between Los Angeles and Palm Springs is kind of the best way to describe us. We're about an 84% unduplicated count district. So we have a lot of needy families and a kind of a needy community. But we also know that they're very resilient. They've done an amazing job embracing technology. We've had a one-to-one program since about 2015. It was a take-home program at our secondary schools early on. It's interesting how this pandemic has evolved things. We're probably closer to a 2-to-1 program now, where students have device at home. And then, of course, we've replaced them with devices back at school now that we have our students returning to in-person instruction. So it's actually kind of been a good thing. My background is traditionally in technology. I started in 1999 in the Oceanside School District. When I moved to San Jacinto in 2007, I was still in technology. I transitioned to business services in the year 2010. That was kind of an interesting time, if you remember what was happening in 2010 in education. It was sort of the last time we went through this cycle of kind of a downturn, an economic downturn, and kind of some tough times in education. So that was an interesting time to transition. It's just been great to be here and to continue to oversee technology and be involved with student learning as it relates to technology as a tool for our students.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I think what really struck me in some of the pre-planning meetings that we had is, just the rich background that both of you bring into your roles and bring into this conversation. Seth, I'm going to start with you on this next question. Really thinking about total cost of ownership, right? As this topic or today's panel is about, I'd love to start unpacking what that actually means, right? What do we mean by total cost of ownership? What are the different buckets of cost that people should be thinking about as they launch new initiatives or even maintain current initiatives, and sort of start outlining what that looks like? So Seth, I don't know if you want to take that first, and then Grant on to you.
Absolutely, yeah. Great question. I think it's interesting when you think about starting a program like this, or even reflecting on a program, an existing program. I think it's always smart to tie it to your instructional goal. How does this relate to students? How does this relate to our overarching mission, vision, values for our school district? For us, literacy is it for us. We want every student at grade level reading at all grades. We think that has, that's going to have the most dramatic impact on their college and career readiness as they move forward. And so the first thing we talk about is, how does this one-to-one initiative going to support your instructional goals? And that's kind of a lens that I think that needs to be kind of in play. Don't do a one-to-one initiative because you want to say you have one, right? Or you want the publicity or something else. It should be tied to instructional and student academic outcomes. Beyond that, I would say that punchline, the cost of the device itself is the most affordable component of your program when you get into it. When you think about to have a successful program and professional learning, authentication, integration solutions, your repair process, break fix, whether you're going to offer hot spares, what's an acceptable amount of time for a student to have a broken Chromebook or a broken device or not have access, your infrastructure in your network and your infrastructure outside of your network. You really come down to a Chromebook that costs, let's say, I think we've been paying between $250 and $300 recently, becomes the most affordable component when you consider kind of all those factors. There's a number of great solutions out there that we've just relied on to make this work. Single sign-on for us has been essential. And so one of the tools we use for that is Clever. Every Chromebook starts up and it has that splash screen. And once students sign in, they have access to all of their materials, including those literacy instructional applications to help promote that instructional goal. One other thing to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about this process is where's that sweet spot with end of life. You know, you can go to, and by the way, obviously Chrome is not the only platform, but when we're looking at, we could pay a lot more money and get that 7-year end of life feature, right? Or we could pay a little less and maybe that feature set's going to run out in, you know, say 3 to 4 years. Where's that sweet spot for your organization? And how does it roll into available ongoing funds? So those are some things that kind of come to mind when I think of total cost of ownership.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of those. I think the key that Seth was talking about, and I think my main point too, was you don't want to do this unless you're focusing on instruction. It really, there are so many people, especially with the injections of money that are coming federally and from states to solve the learning loss mitigation and all of the different things that are happening right now. There's a lot of need for Chromebooks, for devices, for whatever you choose to use. And what I'm afraid of is that so many people didn't invest in the infrastructure, didn't invest in the training, didn't invest in some of the key pieces of a good one-to-one program that kind of take years to put in place. Because we had to go in March of last year one-to-one, and so many people went out and flooded kids with devices, but teachers really had never been trained to do a lot of different things. Many of our school networks were taxed beyond belief, and continue to be. Security, device management, learning management systems, all of those things were new to teachers in a lot of cases. And I think some of the neat features and advantages Tustin had when March happened is we have had the one-to-one program in place for a long time. And even prior to that, and we're so lucky that we have a community tech bond. So when we talk about puddles of money, we had a $135 million head start on most people. And that sounds overwhelming, and I'm not saying you can't do it without it, especially right now, but it was a great head start. And I think the other foresight that was really, you know, our board and my boss, Dr. Franklin, had that the foresight to not jump in and focus on what device we were going to buy, but to kind of have us fly as a learning team around to places that had done one-to-one programs successfully, like Mooresville, North Carolina, and really investigate what did they do, what worked for them, you know, find some model districts that had deployed whatever device it was, what instructional goals were they accomplishing, what learning management did they have, what security did they have, so that we didn't encounter something like, you know, we have a fairly large district in California that put out about $10 million worth of iPads to kids without a lot of security to them. And they quickly had $5 million worth of iPads. We didn't want to repeat those type of mistakes, because when you put it on a bond, your taxpayers are trusting that you're going to execute effectively and that they're going to get a long-term return. We wanted to make sure it was about instruction first. We knew in order for it to be about instruction first and primary as a goal, we had to invest in that infrastructure and the training. So in a nutshell, I would tell people, if I were going to give them very simple advice, in my opinion, to be effective in a one-to-one program, you need to spend about a 3-to-1 ratio for whatever device, and that device comes really late in your planning process. You need to spend $3 on training people and building your infrastructure for every $1 you spend on whatever toy you're buying for people. We are really lucky because we had that head start, and we are an iPad district TK through 8. And we are Surface Pro. We have Surface Pro 6s or 7+ now for all of our students in the high school level. So, and we chose those devices really strategically, not only for ease of use and across languages. We didn't want something that would be highly pilferable. We wanted it to be managed very easy. But we also wanted the most powerful tool we could give kids and teachers at that age group. And that really, truly was the focus once we had the infrastructure pieces in place. What was going to move the ball the furthest? You know, and give teachers the chance to do something that otherwise could never be done. And a Chromebook wasn't going to do it for us. We wanted the interactivity. We wanted the ability for a kid to take over the class and say, no, that's not what our group came up with. We want to, you know, take it and airplay it up onto the screen so that everybody can see my example. You know, but even before that, how did we teach teachers how to do that sort of thing? You know, and we spent $1.3 million a year for 5 years on a mentoring program where we took the best teachers, not the best technologists, but the best teachers from K-12 and had them paired with 10 mentees across our district. We called them digital learning coaches and really truly put in a peer coaching model. And that happened for a long time before devices ever hit classrooms. So they were super confident and we had tons of role models when it did happen.
I think this is really insightful because I think, you know, just to synthesize a little bit, very simply what you guys said, like it's not about the device, right? I mean, yes, that's oftentimes when people talk about one-to-one is probably the one thing that everybody focuses on. And we saw that happen a lot, especially at the, you know, at the start of the pandemic where it was just about let's get devices into the hands of kids and voila, we've solved the problem. And the reality is that's not what it's about, right? And it's the device is just a mechanism to deliver something, to interact with something, but really isn't the crux of it. Both of you talked a lot about training and a lot about infrastructure. And I'd like to dive into some of those things. Those to me are things that, you know, you can't do with every single initiative over and over and over again, right? And so as you think about how do you streamline some of these costs? How do you streamline some of these processes so you're making the most of what you're spending money on, and not having wasteful costs and not having wasteful initiatives? So I'd love to have each of you talk a little bit about streamlining buckets of cost, how things can support one another, especially, you know, again, going back to this notion of device isn't the answer. That's probably a one-time rollout, one-time investment. How do you take that and saying, what other things can we do that we can, you know, not duplicate efforts and maximize results? So Seth, would love to have you start with that.
Sure. Thank you for that. And Grant, just appreciate what you shared. Just several things when you mentioned, you know, 3-to-1. Those things just strike a chord with me. And then just the notion that these are public dollars, and we have this responsibility to manage them well, to know that we're meeting the needs of our community, the needs of our taxpayers. When we think about streamlining costs, or when we think about total cost of ownership, the management of those costs is so critical. And so, you know, when we think about this program, one of the rules we have, sort of unwritten rules that we have in our district is how do we try to achieve cost neutrality? You know, as much as possible, when we look at the resources we already have devoted to any particular initiative, how do we tweak those resources so that we provide better service for the same or less cost? That's an overarching goal. That's a return on investment for our community. For our students. When we think about some of those things, and again, Grant mentioned some of those things, we are platform agnostic, but I recommend you choose one. Choose one, standardize, be consistent. We've got a number of different brands of Chromebooks, but for example, they all share the same screen. And so what that allows us to do is we do some in-house repairs. We do have a hot spare program. We don't want any student to be without a device. So when they bring it in that's broken, we just give them a new one and we repair that one. But having the same screen on all of our devices allows us to buy bulk screens, and we do some of those processes in-house to replace those screens. When we think about cost neutrality, you know, a lot of this comes down to collective bargaining too. We're blessed with a very collaborative relationship with our classified association, which primarily provides tech support, as you know, although obviously we have some certificated tech support staff as well, particularly on the professional learning side. But one of the things that I can tell you that happened over the last 10 years longer than that since I've been in San Jacinto is we had our library media staff who primarily at one time worked with books, right, in the library. And what do you think they primarily work with today? Devices, right? And so working with our association to rewrite that job description to figure out what's competitive and fair pay for them and convert that existing resource into what really turns out to be our tier 1 support for our students and families for our one-to-one program has just been absolutely essential. If we think about our core IT staff, I think over the last 10 years or so, we've added maybe 1 or 2 positions, and our device count has, quadrupled. We couldn't do it with just 1 or 2 people. We had to come up with a way to kind of evolve and develop, to look at our existing resources and reallocate those resources so we continue to serve our students. And again, is in a perfect world, is it always cost neutral? Well, of course not. You're always going to make some kind of existing investment, but managing those costs is so essential in making sure that, again, you're doing your due diligence with your community.
I think those are fantastic points, Seth. The first thing that I would say is you can diversify the way that you pay for this, in a lot of different ways. We do have the advantage of the bond that got us started. But right now with the funds that are coming in, align everything to your instructional goals. And that opens so many doors to grants, to the federal funding, to the state funding, to your general fund. And it's tough to argue with it when you start having the relationship issues, or if you have bargaining teams that aren't as friendly to this effort as maybe what we both have. And we are very fortunate that I think in both of our districts, Seth and I have great relationships, with our bargaining teams. So I think that's fortunate. Not everybody has that. But I think everybody who gets into education wants kids to be successful. And I think, when it tugs at the heartstrings the most, and when you get the most movement with people, everyone can look at student learning and everyone can see data and performance gaps and the LCAP and, all of your board goals that are trying to, promote equity for kids and promote learning for kids. And you can point to the purchases that you're making here as making a direct impact. And you need to get measurable results that you can show people. Yes, we're investing X number of dollars from these different sources, but look what it's doing. We have higher engagement. How are you measuring that? Are you using metrics? Google has an amazing set of metrics that you can pull out. I mean, we know how many Google Docs are created every single day, every single hour, in what classes, at what grade levels. And we know how many of them are collaborative documents. We know how many of them are to give to the teacher, or how many of them are just for kids to collaborate with each other. And oftentimes it's happening at 8 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, with groups teaming up from different schools. It's pretty incredible to see what kids are doing with this and how it mirrors the real world. It's really impossible when you provide data like that to your community or your constituents in general. It's tough to say that this isn't something that is worth investing in. So I love it. When we rolled out our one-to-one initiative, obviously it was an instructional initiative first. We called it Tustin Connect. And it was a really important branding piece in my mind, that we made it something that everybody bought into, and that everybody from students to parents to teachers to our classified staff, like Seth was talking about, we had to pivot our LMTs too in order to make this stuff happen, from librarians to text. Yeah. But it was important that Tustin Connect rang as a very clear message of what we were doing from the beginning. It was, we had everybody repeat it for 2 years straight, that it was rigorous standards, because it was right at the time of Common Core and NGSS, the National Next Generation Science Standards, right at that transition point is when we were rolling this out. It wasn't a real popular thing on our wealthier side of town, the whole Common Core. They didn't see a lot of problems with what was happening in every classroom. But yet we had the other 50% of our population that couldn't wait for that to happen. So we had to find common ground with those things. We just said, we all want rigorous standards for our kids. We all want engaging instructional strategies from our teachers. We want kids to want to learn and to be hungry and to go get the next thing that prepares them for the future. So rigorous standards, engaging instructional strategies, and then it was all supported by technology. So it came in that order. And as long as we were doing the first two, tech was just there and the device was just there. to make that other stuff happen. And I think when you can focus things that much, every performance gap you have, every funding source you have, almost all of it's in play to solve those first two goals.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I think that, you know, I think both of you touched upon as we think about streamlining cost or wasted, like eliminating wasted spend or minimizing it. I think the notion of cost neutrality, I think, is so critical here, and being able to look at what resources do you already have that you can level up almost, right? And turn them into something that's going to support a district-wide initiative like Tustin Connect, right? Like, how do you take folks that have been doing something, but now like the whole notion of librarians becoming tech support, it's so fantastic, right? Like, you're literally not only up-leveling them from a skill set perspective, but filling a need in your district by not hiring a 20, 30, 40 person tech team that is just dedicated, and you're really almost trying to get buy-in from the entire district and your entire staff to say, this, we're all in this together. We're all going to do this together. And such a great example of redeploying resources or reallocating resources all towards a common goal. I think it's great. I heard both of you touch upon ROI a little bit, and I don't think you can actually have a TCO, total cost of ownership conversation, without ROI. And so I do want to take an opportunity to dive a little bit into how you look at return on investment. Both of you started off the conversation by saying, this is not about the technology, it's about the end objective, right? Seth, you mentioned literacy as an example of that. Yeah. Everything ties back into that in the district. So as you think about ROI, how do you then think about ROI tied to that end objective? And could you share, and you did start doing this a little bit in the previous segment here, but could you share some other examples of measurements that you're looking at, especially things that you take back to the board, right? When you make massive investments, I'm sure the board comes back to you at that next board meeting and says, well, what happened? And what did that investment yield? Grant, I'd actually love to start with you this time, and then Seth to follow on from there.
For sure. I think it's a great question. And I think you can't sit in the chairs that Seth and I sit in without worrying about ROI a lot. It's our whole employment. If we don't get ROI, we will be looking for jobs in other districts. So it's one of those deals where, yeah, it's always on your mind, and it should be. You have to be a good steward of taxpayer money, especially when you're using a bond. But more so, it's about that end goal. It's about equity. It's about, the reasons we're here. A lot of kids can succeed in spite of things that happen in schools. A lot of kids are dependent on us to help them be successful. And so I take a lot of pride in making sure that our wealthiest students have an equal opportunity to succeed as our most challenged students. And I think we've invested in that infrastructure to make sure that that can happen. We give the same professional development to all of our schools. We make sure that every single classroom in Tustin, so we have 1,158 classrooms right now, every single one of them is outfitted the exact same way. We use general fund monies that we set aside every single year to make sure that every 7 years, our classrooms are brand new. We have 2 90-inch LED TVs in every single classroom with Apple TVs, Miracast units, different casting systems, different cameras, audio systems, a lot of different resources, which made live streaming amazing once we were able to do that. We also had a union that was willing to live stream when all of this went down right into the classroom, so that the next day, kids who wanted to be at home could just see what was happening in the classroom. So equity was a big piece. We wanted to get devices that lasted. The hardest part with buying, in my opinion, when you start to focus on the device, you want the most capable thing that you can buy for whatever price point you can afford. But at the same time, almost every manufacturer will tell you right now, they don't build devices for 7 years. They don't build devices for 5 years. And a lot of them will tell you flat out, most of our people get rid of this at the end of the second year, and they're building them with a disposable mentality. we can't operate buying new stuff every other year. It doesn't work that way. So some of the other qualifiers that we use when we buy things, buy the devices, buy the tech for in the classrooms too, buy our network pieces, all of those things, we have a 5-year minimum life cycle. And we negotiate very hard with whoever we're going to work with. And negotiating with companies like Apple and Microsoft, while they're great companies, they're there to make money. So they're not going to give you free stuff. And they'll give you some discounts on volume and things like that. But to get a 4-year warranty, to get a, insurance at a discounted price, things like that are all really important factors that go beyond the price of the unit itself. How often do you have to replace them? What type of scrutiny did you give those devices before you bought them on scale that you feel that they really are going to last 4 or 5 years so that you can use a funding mechanism like a bond? You don't want your taxpayers paying taxes on a device you're not using anymore. That is a quick way to have a lot of heat on you. So we do a 5-year refresh cycle, but we have the bond set up in a way where, and we have our price points on our devices set up in a way where we could refresh at 4 if we had to. And we've worked with our vendors who've been incredible with us as kind of early adopters of this type of program to give us 4-year warranties, which is pretty unheard of on a device that they'll admittedly say is a 3-year device. So that Surface Pro 6, 7 Plus, and the iPad has been a good solution for us for all of those reasons.
Fantastic.
So, I agree and echo a lot of those statements. Oftentimes in my position in my district, lots of people knock on my door, and what do you think they ask me as the assistant super of business services? They ask me for more money or more budget or allocation or something like that. And one of my most common replies is, how is this going to make kids smarter? Like I want to bring it to the student lens as much as possible. And of course, you can't always make that connection. But sometimes when people are asking for new office furniture, they kind of question themselves a little bit. Like, okay, so is your office furniture going to move the needle in terms of our student outcome measures? It may, if you can justify it. So this idea of a return on investment for me comes down to value. We acknowledge fund scarcity. We are in some unprecedented times here with federal and state stimulus dollars. I've never seen this magnitude. I alluded to the Great Recession earlier in 2010. When we think about the stimulus dollars we received in 2010 compared to the stimulus dollars we're receiving in 2021, I figured it out, and I think it's on a magnitude of more than tenfold. At the same time, they are one-time monies. You get to spend them one time. And how do you make sure that you're delivering that maximum value on investment for your students and community, for your stakeholders, for your staff, to make sure you're making those solid investments that are going to serve you for years to come. When I think about some things that we do, any initiative we take on, we're either going to become an expert or we're going to identify someone trustworthy who is, right? If I can't be the expert on whatever product or initiative we're considering, whether it's one-to-one or something else, I'm going to identify someone trustworthy who is, because I don't need the splashiest product. I don't need, I'm not tied to any brand or anything. What I want is something functional to suit our operational or instructional need. That's what we're after. And we're after the best value, as Grant said. And that means that we don't have, established relationships with common vendors because we like them. We do it because it serves our district's business or instructional interest. That's the key to us. That's the key for us.
Yeah, that's great.
Trying to think of other things. I think networking and communication is huge. I shared with Grant before our call today. I'm super excited to learn more about a project that he rolled out that we're talking about, where basically he's got his own network in all of his students' rooms. We're not there yet. We're still deploying hotspots, and they drive us crazy. And so not having to reinvent the wheel every time, knowing that there's a solution out there, knowing that I can reach out, talk to peers, talk to other districts, find out how they've tackled the same problems, and figure out what solutions worked and what solutions didn't. That's just an incredible advantage we have, because I'm really not in direct competition with Grant, right? I can call him up and say, hey, how did Tustin handle this? Tell me more about Tustin Connect. That's just a cool thing that we have in our industry that because we're all after, what's going to make the collective good for kids better.
Yeah. Seth, you absolutely read my mind. That was the exact segue I was going to try to make. And your point about, spending one-time dollars that we have right now effectively, I think that's huge. You want to use these one-time dollars that you may be getting from, the extended learning opportunities grants, all the ELOG, the ESSA, all of the one-time monies that you got from the feds or the state. It's a great opportunity. And you want to make sure that you use that opportunity for the longest term gain possible. And spread that money out the best you can. Have it accomplish the biggest swing you can possibly make over the long term to close your performance gaps. And the way that we attacked this, and Seth kind of alluded to it, was a long time ago, we thought, we're kind of hemorrhaging money to telecoms. And we're also being kind of held hostage by the amount of bandwidth that we can have. And how do we free ourselves from that and give ourselves future-proof opportunities? So we decided that we needed to light a dark fiber network between all 31 of our buildings. We needed to build redundant data centers so that we couldn't be, it was more difficult to take us over, hold us hostage, whatever the, do bad stuff to our network and our data. We wanted to make it a redundant system, or redundant's not a resilient system. We don't want to say the word redundant in the E-rate world. But you definitely want to build something that has some fail safes and gives you some dependability. So we lit a dark fiber ring to all 31 sites. And it's a resilient network. So if we have one above ground line to every site and one underground line to every site. So if a car takes out a power pole that you're hanging on, it immediately reroutes and goes back through at the speed of light the other direction. We can also get, each band of our network can get up to 80,000 devices on it. So we only have 24,000 kids, but we do operate on over 58 to 60,000 devices on a daily basis. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. So when we were trying to go through an AT&T pipe with that type of volume, you were hitting roadblocks everywhere. And it was nothing they did wrong. They told us up front how much they had. We were just using all of it. And so we had the opportunity and the need to expand. And now we've taken that one step further with this crisis that we're all facing. And we looked again at our performance gaps and what are our equity differences from one side of town to another. And we started deploying hotspots at $30 a kid. And again, relying on the bandwidth that was available from a telecom. And it's minimal. When every kid is online, tapping the same tower and needing to do Zoom or, Google Meets and things like that all at the same time, often 5, 6 kids in the same house or the high density housing areas, we needed to try to solve that problem. So we leveraged our actual internal fiber network onto a long range Wi-Fi network that, some might define as LTE, but it's actually, far lower in its signal strength than what a 5G or a 4G tower would be. Doesn't throw the signal quite as far, throws it over the top of our campuses, not into our campuses. So a lot of really important steps that were taken, a lot of engineering to get it done, but we now own our own ability to put a TUSD hotspot in a student's house and put our secure network right in their room on our own SIM card and not pay that $30 per month per student and really level the playing field. And the cool benefit that we found was if you're a mile away, even in high density housing, and in anything inside of a mile away, we can get you 3-4 times the speed of what an LTE hotspot could get you. And you're right on our secure network, no streaming Netflix, no bad sites, and we can truly protect kids a lot better than passing out that hotspot too.
Yeah, that's amazing. Grant, you transitioned into our next topic so seamlessly, but I'll just, for the benefit of the audience, just to say, we're transitioning to talking about there's funding out there, right? And Seth, you made the point of like 10x than the last economic downturn. I mean, that's huge, but it is this one time money spend. And so talking about how do we prioritize that spending, you know, how do you think about what is it that you should be spending on to propel yourself forward? Grant, during our call, our planning call, you talked about dream big, right? Don't think about small things. Really think about analyzing the gaps that you have today and solving those gaps with this big money. And Grant, you talked a little bit about what you did last time and what you're thinking to do. Seth, would love to kind of have you share some ideas on what are you thinking about, right? What is the district thinking about on how to best leverage the funding sources that are available right now, and to meet some gaps that you might have, and not have an opportunity otherwise to solve than in this current situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's historic and unprecedented. You know, we talk about where we came in a year, and we've had this conversation with our teachers, and just some of the amazing things we've seen from our students, our staff, our principals, our school sites, our parents. You know, I've told people this: if we had planned to evolve this quickly, we would not have been successful. But because we were forced to evolve this quickly, you know, our students and our staff members, our community members, our parents and our families made it happen. Just incredibly resilient. It's just amazing. Grant referred to it earlier. We have teachers that are simulcasting as well. I mean, it blows me away, and they're doing it seamlessly. They're talking to kids in remote locations, and they're teaching kids in their classroom at the same time. And again, if I go back pre-pandemic, 2019, everyone would have said, no way, it's not possible. Our kids couldn't do it. We don't have the infrastructure to do it. We don't have the devices. We don't have the professional learning. We don't have the support. And yet here we are. So it's just interesting to kind of have this reflection and look back. Nuts and bolts wise, you know, while I agree with Grant, you got to dream big. It's got to be sustainable once the money is gone, right? You've got to have something that's sustainable with your daily bread and butter, and we all know what that is. What our regular budget allocations and stuff are, what our regular support mechanisms are. That's not to say there aren't opportunities to evolve and develop, which I alluded to earlier. You know, we have that red, green, yellow light test in a lot of things we do, right? What should we start doing for our students and families in our departments, in our school sites? What should we keep doing, right? And then what should we stop doing? You know, back to that value on investment, return on investment. We're doing some stuff that doesn't move the needle. We have positions that doesn't move the needle, right? And so how do we reallocate that resources to increase that sustainability factor? Nuts and bolts, of course, you always spend your most restricted dollars first. So Grant alluded to them. There are lots of pockets of money right now. We are fortunate that some of the federal stimulus dollars, which are really our largest allocation, even though the state's been very generous as well with the expanded learning opportunity grant, the in-person grants, et cetera. It's kind of unrestricted, right? So we're spending some of those dollars last, and the dates are a little bit later. So those are some kind of nuts and bolts things. But we're absolutely thinking about things that we can make in one-time investments that will provide those annual years of return. And at the end, again, they're sustainable. You know, we can't be stuck with a maintenance fee that our regular budget allocation can't pay for, right? We can't be stuck with, you know, creating some device or initiative that's going to require, you know, 4 or 5 additional technology team members that we don't have the funding for once this money all runs out. So just some high level thinking about where we go from here. But it's daunting. You can't complain about having this much resources. If I could go back to 2010 and the layoff lists we had on board agendas, I wouldn't trade it for a minute. But thinking about ways to responsibly spend all of this funding is a challenge, is a real challenge.
I agree. I think you have to do some careful analysis. You know, you have to understand, you know, hidden things are in there about like what is your loss going to be every year? What's your repair cost going to be? How are you going to insure kids who didn't purchase insurance? You know, how many devices are you going to allow your staff to buy and your schools to buy? If this was an equity initiative right off the bat, and you just provided a baseline, or not beyond a baseline, you provided a standard across the district, and now your wealthy schools want to get ahead again, and they have $1 million worth of, you know, financing from their ed funds and booster clubs and things like that. PTAs, PTOs come in and they want to buy something special for their classroom. Do you allow that? You know, or do you say, well, if you're going to add that extra piece, our infrastructure doesn't allow that. So are you going to support the staff that supports those devices too over the long term? And that makes people really think about that. It's not just a computer you're adding into a room. It's not just a one-time purchase. It's an ongoing cost of ownership. And you have to be able to paint that picture for people when you're doing this type of initiative. Do you have 7% loss every year? How are you going to replace those? What are you going to, like Seth talked about, are you going to hot swap devices? You know, are you going to have a stock so that kids aren't down ever? Where are you paying for that from? Are people going to criticize that? You know, how many do you need? Do you overbuy? You know, if you're going to promise people there's a hot swappable item, you better have one. So you got to buy enough. So those are all this balancing act that's so hard. I liked the red, yellow, green, like the stoplight thinking. We use an analogy that, you know, you identify your problems. You take, you have to have the big audacious goals and the dream, you know, that you go after, because the network was not a small investment. That millions and millions of dollars to get something like that going. But we painted the picture for what it was going to be in the future. We tried links between our data centers first. And we, just like your stoplight idea, we talk about that we kind of shoot several bullets in different areas. And then when we find one that hits, we cue up the cannonball. And that's really what we did. We made sure that this whole theory was going to work first, and then, you know, quintupled down on it. And it's been a great ROI. It's, you know, what we used to pay in a month for a tenth of the bandwidth is what we pay in a year. And we have so much more control. But we have to have a network engineer who knows what he's doing. And we have to invest in the growth in that team. Because AT&T is not going to help us cut them out of $300,000. So we have to think through stuff like that too. So it's just buy the toy, but you got to be able to maintain it. You got to stay ahead of hackers. You got to do a lot of really things that you never thought you'd be doing in a school district.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting because, you know, there's always this notion of, like, you know, as a school district, do you go into some of these owning a network and running, you know, something like Tustin Connect? And I think, to your point, you have to think about the value that it's going to bring, the return it's going to bring. You probably wouldn't have been able to scale the way that you did this past year without this investment 5-6 years ago, right? So kudos to you for that. It's huge. This has been such an incredible conversation. I know we're about a few more minutes in here. Would love to just ping the audience. If you have thoughts on the conversation, if you have questions, please take the time to put those into the chat. I'm going to give Seth and Grant a few minutes to just help us wrap up some lasting thoughts. You've already given so much advice, so much advice to the listeners, but, you know, if you were leaving them with some key takeaways, I think a lot of school districts are going into a very, very daunting task of how do we spend the money that we have and make it worthwhile. They don't want to lose out on this incredible opportunity, but they want to spend smart. And both of you think about that day in and day out. So would love to give you a chance to say final thoughts for the audience. Seth, do you want to kick us off there?
Sure. Yeah, just enjoyed being here today with everybody. Enjoyed talking with you, Grant, and meeting you with you. See, I talked about networking, and now I have a new network contact by way of this event this morning. So just fantastic. Just some other kind of things that we think about here. We really try to, you know, I think there are some districts and some organizations that are still riddled in silos. And I would just strongly encourage you to just, if you happen to be one of those districts or you're stuck in that mode, reach out. I mean, we really have and enjoy, and it's for the betterment of our students. It's for the betterment of our community. We really reach out to all groups. And so I know that Our directors regularly sit in on principal cohort meetings. It's amazing in the Zoom world, you know, in the past we had trouble scheduling meetings, and now it's easy to pop something on a calendar and for everybody to go in. Just be that team player. I guess, you know, when I think about some of the things that come across my desk or some of the things that we get asked all the time, I always tell people that the easy answer is no a lot of times, right? When people want to do something different in their classroom or different at their school site, whether it comes from a principal or a teacher or even a student, you know, you can always say, well, you know, there's a security concern. It's too much money, liability, right? Well, we're just not prepared to support that. Or, you know, I would encourage you to find a way to say yes. You know, and that doesn't mean that you can always say yes, and you can't ignore your network security. Of course, you can't ignore privacy concerns or confidentiality. You're not going to put a student at risk or do anything dangerous or illegal or immoral, but you might just be able to say, you know, we can't do it that way, but we can do it this way. We can make this tweak and make it happen. I would just encourage all of us to be that creative, thoughtful, innovative change partner. Embrace the change, embrace the motivation. When people are excited to do something different and it doesn't fit their mold, let them try it, support them. You know, those are some things we kind of consider doing around here. We try to serve our schools. We try to serve our students. Just one other kind of like sharing from this last year of what all we went through. But if you remember what happened between, you know, say this May and last May, we were basically looking at potentially a 10% cut to all of our revenues. Mm-hmm. I alluded to 2010 earlier. There's almost no way, unless a district has a vast amount of reserves, if you're going to hit with a 10% cut to your revenues, that is going to include positions. You are going to have a layoff list on your board agenda. And immediately, I met with my counterparts in personnel, of course, our superintendent, and in our ed services department. And we thought about how do we creatively make cost savings and reductions and have them affect the classroom the least amount as possible. And we had immediate ways to identify savings. And in the end, we didn't have to, right? Because we know what happened at the end of the state budget. And now we know where we are with all of our stimulus dollars. But having those relationships to sit down and say, hey, guys, we need to work together on this to solve this together. Those are just so important. So just invest in those, get out of your silos, reach out to people. If you have an idea, get their input. Those are just some thoughts about just be that community partner in terms of your school sites and in your schools.
I loved what the theme when you were saying essentially find a way to yes, you know, and help people say yes, because the one, you know, pet peeve I had as a teacher, as an site administrator, was that every time I did walk into an IT office or a business office as a techie person, your first reaction is no. And now that I'm on the other side of the table, I know why. But it can't be no. It has to be, let me help you find a way to get that goal accomplished. And no is the most dangerous word in any type of improvisational or doing something new endeavor. So you have to find a way to get it done. And there are different funding sources. Doing a tech bond was out of the box. No one had done that in our area before, especially not in the height of the recession in a fairly Republican voting area. But it went over very quickly and easily. But the big keys that I would say, that 3-to-1 ratio is important on your spend. Focus on PD, focus on your staff development. You cannot do this without your staff, both supporting the physical side of it and doing the instruction, wanting to make this shift, seeing the value in engaging kids through technology. If they don't, you can buy whatever fancy toy you want and it's not going to work. They have to buy in that this shift is valuable. And your community has to too. Equity in your instructional goals have to drive what you do. And then have those big dreams. Invest in your infrastructure before you start looking at devices, and I think you'll be very successful. And then use your network, like you said, Seth. Yeah, it's great. Every time you meet somebody that helps you solve a problem, your district gets better. We're all paid by tax dollars. We're all trying to help kids get better. So find vendors like paper, like the ones that we work with every single day, that will help your kids be successful. And latch onto those people and help them be successful. Let them help you be successful. So thank you. It's been a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. We do have one question that's come in. And I'm curious in the last minute or two here for your thoughts. Both of you talked about taking these one-time dollars and turning it into something that can last years. And I think the question is like, any recommendations on doing that, right? Like, what are some concrete ways to think about taking that, whether that's in what type of solutions you deploy, or whether that's in what type of initiatives you really think about broadly to make sure one time can last for multiple years?
Want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, outside of the technology space, I can think of lots of examples. Inside the technology space, one of the things that we invested in, or again, sort of a reflection on this last year, primarily our help desk at one time supported roughly our 1,000 staff. What happened when the classroom got distributed to, all of our homes across our community? We're now directly supporting 10,000 students and families. Primarily that support would come by way of course, we were supporting students, but by way of the teacher. It was sort of one voice. So one thing we invested in is a new help desk system. We had used the same system for 15 years, and it helped us automate processes. For routine calls that we could solve, there's a knowledge base now, and people can go on and solve their own problems. It has a chat feature. Those are some ways that I think we talked about before, that return on investment, where we're taking our existing allocation of dollars and we're either improving our service level or we're reducing costs, right? Those are our goals: improve service level or reduce costs. Those are some things we're doing. We're looking at, again, I'm very interested. I will be contacting Grant when we're offline here. But how do we take this and build our own metropolitan area network with wireless fidelity everywhere? We want ubiquitous wireless connectivity for all of our students in all of our homes. We want to get out of the hotspot game, and the support headaches that come along with that. That's another example. Outside of the technology space, I can tell you that energy savings, we're doing HVAC, and I guess there's a technology component, energy management systems, because it's, I mean, what don't you buy these days that doesn't have a Wi-Fi enabled device, right? And so we're replacing HVAC systems. Of course, it's nice because from a health perspective, it's going to be, cleaner, fresher air. It has a nice, with the pandemic and everything we're going through, but they're going to run cheaper and they're going to keep our classrooms more comfortable. And it's a one-time investment that will produce an ongoing energy savings. So those are some things that kind of come to mind when we're thinking about how to responsibly spend all this infusion of cash.
Great.
Yeah. And I'll double down on what I said before. I mean, you can't win this effort without people. People are a long-term investment. The growth in your people is something to invest in right now. They're tired, so there's a little bit of a balancing act. Going to teachers and saying, "Hey, how about you spend all summer doing professional development?" May not be the best idea right now. I'm just guessing, but you do want to find the places where you can invest in people, growing your people, giving them new skills. Asking them, what did you struggle with when you were forced to do this from home? What can you solve so that you're nimble and you're able to do this? If we ever had to do something like this again, how would you pivot immediately and be able to do something effective? Do you have those type of plans and contingencies in place? Do they have the tools and the skills to be able to do that stuff? Does your staff support it? Like you said, the help desk, one of the most kind of heartwarming stories that I know of from our IT over the pandemic was when this first happened in March. We certainly served students and we certainly served tons of people by going out to their homes to make sure that things were working, by way up and beyond the call of duty for a lot of our people. Very dangerous for a lot of our people, and we kind of had to have some conversations about that. But our community called our IT help desk. I've never done Zoom before, and now I've been told I have to do it for work. And I have my student's iPad at home, and I'm going to lose my job. I don't know how to do it. And our IT guys our IT people, I got to be more inclusive, but our IT folks were actually helping community members that don't have kids.
That's a great story.
Get connected, use our devices when the kids weren't using them for school to do their work. And I really think it kept a little bit of our economy going. So do you have that sort of stuff in place so you can help your community, so you can be nimble, so you can respond? You can use that money to grow skills in your people. I also think the infrastructure can't be understated. That's a long-term investment. When you look at how long you can amortize that sort of thing on a bond or something, you can actually amortize infrastructure costs over a much longer period of time. They're good for a longer period than a standard desktop computer or a mobile device. You can look at other funding sources that way. And then constantly, keep tweaking, upgrading, maintaining. And that'll over time give you that ROI you were looking for. So lots of ways to extend the money.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Seth and Grant. I mean, such an incredible conversation and discussion, and just so many things shared for the audience. Thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed listening in today. We will be providing a recap of the conversation. I'm not sure how we're going to recap all of this incredible information, but we will also be sharing a recording, so that's good. We're going to be continuing this series around scaling one-to-one experiences next week, all around building technology infrastructures for anytime, anywhere learning. We've got a great panel lined up for that. So in your chat, there's a link. If you are interested in joining us, please do. And again, Seth and Grant, thank you so much for today. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Take care.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you. Awesome.